Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. My name's Amber. I upload true crime and beauty content. If they're the type of videos that you like to watch, then why not hit that subscribe button and come along and join our little family. In today's video, I am going to be doing my makeup while going along and reading out this case to you guys. I'm going back to basics. This is how I started doing these videos on my channel, and it gives me a way to really incorporate beauty into my channel, which is what my passion is. So I will link any products that I used on my face below, just in case you were curious. And now we can get into today's True Crime Tuesday. This is a particularly gruesome and grisly case, and it might make some people feel uncomfortable. Please feel free to click off this video. There'll be plenty of other true crime cases that might be better for you over on my channel. So let's just get straight into today's case, and today we're going to be talking about the Dardeen family murders. On the evening of November 18th of 1987, police went to the mobile home of Russell Keith Dardeen, who was aged 29. This was located in Enna, Illinois, in the United States, and he had basically failed to show up for work. So the police were alerted to this, and they just wanted to do sort of like a welfare check to see what was going on and to make sure that everything was okay, because it was sort of out of character for him not to show up to work. Upon arriving at the Dardeen family residence, they were shocked. The police were shocked to discover the bodies of Keith's wife, along with his 2-year-old son and his unborn daughter. So Keith Dardeen and his wife Elaine lived in a beige and white mobile home which was nestled along Woodland beside Route 37, just outside of Enna, Illinois, and they lived with their 2-year-old son Peter. Elaine was also pregnant with their second child, a daughter who they planned to call Casey. Both of the Dardeens actually went by their middle names. Keith was native of Mount Carmel. He bought the trailer in 1986 after completing training for his job as a treatment plant operator at the Rend Lake Water Conservatory District's nearby facility. Elaine was from Albion, which was a little bit closer to Enna. They rented the land that their mobile home sat on from a nearby farming couple. While Keith was working as a plant operator, this allowed Elaine the opportunity to get herself a job, and she actually started working at an office supply store in Mount Vernon. So while not working, the couple actually really loved music, and they were part of the music ensemble at the small Baptist church in the village. Keith sang lead vocals and Elaine played the piano. When Elaine became pregnant, it actually led the couple to question moving out of Enna, and by late that year they had actually put their home up for sale. So Enna is the southernmost village in Jefferson County, and it's a small town. In the 1980s, Enna actually only had a population of 460 people, so it was a very small town. There was a store, a gas station, firehouse, a bank, a post office, but there was little all else. Enna was actually a small town with a really big history, and by big history I mean big crime history. Ooh, she did not have a great name for herself. So there was actually a famous murder case that occurred there in the 1920s. It was actually in 1924, and this was a reverend who was named Reverend Lawrence Height, and he had a lover who was called Elise Sweeten, and they actually tried to see off their partners because they wanted to be together. So the pair of them actually poisoned Sweeten's husband in July and Height's wife in the September, and the autopsies revealed that the pair had been poisoned with arsenic. So both of them actually went to prison, but Elise Sweeten was actually granted another trial, and she was later acquitted for murder and released from jail. This was not the only reason, you know, this grisly history was not the only reason that Keith had decided he wanted to move. He'd actually already spoken to his mother, who was called Joanne Dardeen, and he'd explained that he'd wanted to move back to Carmel for quite some time because Ina just was becoming far too violent, and he regretted ever moving there, and that he would move back to Mount Carmel even if he didn't have a job to go to. There'd been 15 homicides in Jefferson County during the previous 2 years, and there was even a crime that was committed by a guy named Thomas Odell. He actually murdered his full family, his parents and his 3 siblings, as they each individually returned to his home on the night of 1985. Now, even though Odell and others that had been convicted of murder had been charged, it already created this like sort of a bit of a mass hysteria within the town, and as you would be, people were frightened. A friend of Keith's also said that a 10-year-old girl had been raped and murdered, wow, in May of 1987, and Keith had actually become so overprotective of his family that there was one night where a young woman had approached their mobile home in need of some assistance. She basically wanted to come inside and she wanted to use the family's phone, but he was that protective of his family, he refused to let this woman in. I don't know whether this is he's just frightened like the rest of the town, or does he seem a little bit paranoid? So on November 18th, Keith, who was known for being a really reliable worker, didn't turn up to work. He didn't tell his supervisor that he wasn't going to be in that day, and when his supervisor tries to call him, the phone's just unanswered. This being so out of character for Keith, his supervisor actually got very concerned and thought that it would be a good idea to ring Keith's parents, who were divorced but they still both lived in Mount Carmel. Neither of them knew what had happened to their son. They hadn't had any contact with him either, so they weren't aware of any issues. You know, they didn't know that he hadn't turned up to work. So Don Dardeen, who was actually Keith's father, actually contacted the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and agreed to drive down with the house key, because he obviously had a key to get into the house, and he was going to meet the deputies at his son's house. Inside there was a very gruesome and grisly sight, and I'm just going to put a forewarning here, it's not good. They opened the door to actually discover the bodies of Elaine, their newborn baby girl, and Peter, the son. They were all tucked into bed. Elaine had been bound and gagged with duct tape, and they had been beaten to death with a baseball bat, which was actually a birthday gift to Peter from his father Keith. Elaine had actually been beaten so severely that she had delivered a baby girl who actually soon met the same fate as her mother and brother. So Keith was not actually present at the scene, and his car wasn't either, which was a red 1981 Plymouth. So investigators actually assumed that he had killed his wife and children and he had fled and he was on the run. A team of investigators actually went to Keith's mother's house looking for him. Obviously he wasn't there. The killings had apparently taken place the day before, and investigators at this point believed that Keith was the prime suspect. So the police carried on this search for Keith, but this search abruptly ended the following day when a group of hunters actually found Keith's body. Now, this was in a wheat field not far from the trailer, and it was just south of the Franklin-Jefferson County line, and this was near the Rend Lake College. He had been shot 3 times, and his genitals had also been mutilated. Like, this was brutal. His car was then found parked nearby the police station in Benton, which was 11 miles from the Dardeen home. The interior of the car was splattered with blood, and a forensic examination actually showed that he had been killed within an hour of his family. News of these killings made local residents even more fearful for their lives than what they already had been. Many residents started arming themselves, going around with doing their daily tasks, carrying guns. It became quite scary. Now, early reports of this crime were actually very, very limited, and it actually allowed for rumours to spread. It meant there were a lot of contradictory stories flying around regarding what had actually happened to the Dardeen family, and there were 2 different coroners from the 2 different counties, and they actually differed in opinion as to what had actually happened to Keith. One of them believed that he died of a head injury from being shot, where the other reported that it was from the car, when he was being dragged from the car. So this didn't really help things. There was also reports that obviously Elaine did give birth after she had died, or they thought that she had. So there began to be reports flying around that the baby had been ripped from her womb. There was also mutilation of Keith's genitals, which actually started to swirl rumours that there were speculation that Satanists or a cult were involved, because there was apparently Satanists active in the area, and they were saying that they had performed a ritual sacrifice on the family. There was also a thought process that it might be linked to another 3 unsolved murders in the county, or a regional serial killer. Local police agencies decided they were going to join forces with the Illinois State Police to investigate the crime, and there were a total of 30 different detectives who actually worked full-time on this crime, along with following leads and interviewing over 100 people. No one they interviewed proved to help with the case in any way. There was actually a man that was taken into custody. That was quite early on, and he was released after being questioned. They also looked into one of Keith's co-workers who he'd been having a dispute with, but he was actually cleared as well. So they didn't really have any real suspects regarding this case. Anyone who knew the couple, they were always spoken really highly about. No one really had anything sort of bad to say about them. There was a small quantity of marijuana found in the couple's home when they searched the trailer, but they believed that the police believed that it might be actually have been left behind by the killer or killers, and the autopsies found that the couple had no drugs or alcohol in their system. The coroners actually put the time of death for the Dardeens within an hour of each other. The bodies in the trailer had actually been killed 12 hours before they were found, and Keith had been dead for around 24 to 36 hours when he was found. When this came to light, it actually made the case a little bit more difficult, because it was harder to determine how the crime had been committed, because Keith's body was obviously found away from the trailer. You know, was he maybe killed on location, on this location, rather than with his family? At the trailer, it appeared like the killers were not in a rush, and they actually had time to tuck the family in to bed. They murdered them and legit tucked them in. So they tucked Elaine's body into bed along with the children's bodies, and they also cleaned up the scene, suggesting they didn't have an urgency to leave. The amount of effort involved led police to theorise that the crime may have taken place at night. The trailer was on Route 37, which was a busy state highway, but it could have been seen any time from Interstate 57, almost 2,000 feet to the west. It was an open question as to whether there was one killer or multiple. Police found that determining the motive for this case was really, really difficult. The back door had actually been left open, and there was no evidence of a forced entry, which possibly suggests that, well, it does suggest that maybe they knew the killers and they let them into the home. There was a VCR and a portable camera which were left in plain sight in the living room, which suggests that there wasn't a robbery. There was cash and jewellery which remained in the house, and Elaine had actually not been raped or sexually assaulted. Police also found that there didn't seem to be any evidence of any extramarital affairs, because they thought that the way the crime scene was, it seemed almost like a jealous rage, but there was no suggestion that there was another party involved that might have motivated a jealous rage. There was a stack of papers with sports scores found in the house, which led them to wonder whether Keith may have incurred some sort of gambling debts. However, his mother, Joanne, actually told the police that her son was so frugal, he had raised money for his son's college fund by reselling 50-cent cans of soda at work for a small profit. You know, he wanted a good future for his kids. It didn't seem like he was someone who was just going to waste money. Now, the Franklin County coroner actually believed that the Dardeens were not randomly chosen. He felt like they had been chosen by someone on purpose, and he said that he believed it was a very personal and deliberate thing. There was a police expert on cults who told the newspaper that the rumour that Satanists were responsible for this was untrue, since such groups would often mutilate the bodies more extensively. They would also harvest organs and leave symbols and candles at the scene of their crimes. None of these indications were found at the Dardeen crime scene. at either of them, where Keith's body was found or in the trailer. Police also decided to investigate the possibility that maybe it was like a case of mistaken identity. Joanne Dardeen, Keith's mother, later come out to say that she considered that there may have been other motives for a reason why her son and his family were murdered. She said that her son had actually been asked to sell drugs and he'd refused. Maybe this was a motive. And also there was a possibility that someone actually liked Elaine and she'd refused the advances of this person, and maybe he took his rage out on both of them. It eventually came to a point where the police had basically exhausted all of their options. They had no leads and there were other cases that they needed to start working on. 2 FBI profilers actually came to the area to review the evidence, but they found that they were unable to make any suggestions, and it was quite difficult because they found that the crime actually defied any of the typical analytic methods that they would usually use. So Joanne Dardeen, Keith's mother, actually worked to keep public interest on the case. You know, she obviously wants this case solving. So throughout the 1990s, she regularly called one detective which was still assigned to the case. She offered possible new leads she'd learned of, or she asked for any new information that he could share. She gathered 3,000 signatures from area residents for a petition so that they were going to ask the Oprah Winfrey Show if they would pick up the case, but they turned it down. They turned a segment down on the killings because they said that it was basically too brutal for daytime television. They also asked America's Most Wanted, and they had a similar reaction. At first, America's Most Wanted actually did refuse to run a segment on the crime, but then they did run a segment in 1998, but the show did not generate any new leads. Police were briefly interested in a serial killer who was known as Angel Maturino Resides. That's a really hard name. After he surrendered to the authorities in Texas in 1999, he often travelled around the country by hopping freight trains, choosing his victims near the tracks they travelled on, and he beat them to death. While those elements suggested were similar to the Dardeen killings, authorities in Illinois were never ever able to connect him to the crime. Now, there was another serial killer in Texas who actually brought himself to the attention of investigators in Illinois on the last day of 1999. Tommy Lynn Sells. He was a serial killer and he actually slit the throats of 2 girls near Del Rio, Texas. One of them survived, and this is what actually helped convict him. He was eventually convicted and he was sentenced to death for that murder and another one which had earlier occurred in 1990 where he had killed a girl in San Antonio. While he was awaiting the first murder trial, he actually began to confess to other murders he said he had been involved in, and he said that he had often drifted around the country also by catching freight trains. One of the murders he actually admitted to was that of the Dardeen family. Tommy often said that he didn't remember the actual details of the crimes he committed, but he said that it was like a coping strategy because he had been victim of sexual abuse as a child. Now, in the mid 1980s, Tommy was actually living primarily near St. Louis, and this was roughly 90 miles northwest of Jefferson County, and he was making money from working, like traveling carnivals and fairs. He used to like hitch rides with truckers, and he said that he might be in Illinois one day and then Oklahoma the next. You know, so he had the ability to get around. Now, Tommy said that it was through these modes of transport that he actually become familiar with the Eyeliner area, and it was on one trip through Jefferson County in November of 1987. He claimed in 2010 to have met Keith at a truck stop near Mount Vernon, or in a different telling he said it was at a local pool hall. He constantly changed his story, but in both versions he said that Keith invited him home and they had dinner together. He then said after the meal that he was just planning to move on, but Keith actually triggered his anger by sexually propositioning him, in one account to have a threesome with Elaine. He then claims that he forced Keith at gunpoint to drive to where his body was found, and then he mutilated him and returned to the trailer to kill Elaine. And and Peter, who were witnesses. Although he says it was at the time the result of an uncontrollable rage that Keith's alleged sexual offer had set him off. He said, "I was just so pissed off that I took it to the maximum limit. Rage. I don't have a stop button." Now, the problem with Tommy, he changed his story all the time. He had a bad habit of changing his story all the time. Now, some of the things that he said made it believable because it was things that other people wouldn't know, but then he just changed it so frequently that it did make police doubt whether he was just trying to claim this as his own crime. There was also a third version where Tommy actually said that he had an encounter with Keith, the sexual proposition entirely, so he went through with this sexual proposition, and according to that count, he got off the fright he had hopped on near Ina, saw the Dardeen trailer with a for sale sign, and he thought that this was an opportunity for a killing. He'd had a few beers and he waited for the right time, and he actually went to the door, knocked on the door, and told Keith that he was interested in buying the trailer. He then said that he overpowered Keith. He made him bind and gag his wife and his son with duct tape, and he forced him to drive the car to a nearby field at gunpoint, where he sliced off Keith's penis, and he told him that he was going to take it back to Elaine, where he shot him and left it there. At the trailer, he then raped Elaine and beat Peter, Elaine and the newborn baby to death. After cleaning up, he drove the car to Benton. Tommy was actually executed in 2014, and a lot of the investigators thought that this was justice. He was executed in Texas. They thought that this was justice for the Dardeens as well, but he was never actually charged with their murders, but he does remain a #1 suspect. Jefferson County State's Attorney Douglas Hoffman said, a week after the execution, Sheriff Roger Mulch agreed. The county deputy sheriff who interviewed Tommy in his Texas cell says he knew details of the crime that had been kept confidential. So it was stuff that there was no way anyone else would possibly know. The problem is, like I explained, because he constantly changed his story, it did cause a lot of doubt for a lot of people. And there are a lot of investigators. While a lot do believe he did commit the murders, there are a lot of investigators that don't believe he was behind the murders at all. The other investigators, the reason they are so doubtful is because while Tommy is consistent with general facts about the case, most of what he knows is what has been like publicly told in like newspapers and things like that, so it is information that anyone could have picked up. So Tommy was asked about some information that has been withheld from media accounts of the killing, and he seemed a lot less reliable. His claim as to which seat of Keith's Plymouth he was shot in is belied by the evidence, and when asked about how Elaine's body was positioned, he at first answered incorrectly, then correctly, which merely could have been a lucky guess. Now, Tommy obviously made a statement about this, and he did say that I know a lot of people basically doubt that it was me because there's not a lot of evidence, but he said that there wasn't any evidence because they weren't at the time looking for me. Police in Texas have confirmed that Tommy was responsible for 22 murders, but they came to believe in conscious imitation of another Texas serial killer, Henry Lee Lucas. He was trying to avoid the death penalty by confessing to crimes that he'd not committed, and he was basically taking advantage of the judicial system's gratitude. Their counterparts in Illinois wanted to take Tommy to Ina so they could see how well he knew the area and locations relevant to the crimes. He claimed he could lead them to missing evidence. However, Texas law does not allow prisoners on death row to be taken out of state, and authorities there were unwilling to find a way to make an exception. So Duncan declined to file murder charges for lack of sufficient evidence. There are a lot of people who also find the fact that Tommy said that Keith made a homosexual advance towards him highly unlikely. They've never perceived him of ever possibly having an interest in his own sex, and police did not find any evidence of that during their initial investigation. Now, police think that even if Tommy had killed the Dardeens like he claims, that he basically invented this whole story about the sexual advances from Keith's behalf. He often did this because it made him feel like he was more justified in the crimes that he was committing, and it made the victims, like, it almost made him feel like the victims had provoked him. Now, Joanne Dardeen, Keith's mother, her opinion on Tommy's guilt actually evolved over time. In 2000, when the confession was first reported, she told the Chicago Tribune that she was certain that he was the right suspect. She believed that only talking to him could clear up any lingering doubt. She said that "I have always wanted to know every detail." Joanna also said that she was 99% sure at the time that Tommy had committed this murder, but she was just unsure, not unsure whether he had done it, unsure whether someone had actually helped him. And she had expressed her feelings of wanting to actually have a conversation with him, but Tommy said that he didn't understand what this might accomplish, and he said that no apology was going to ever give her closure. "I could tell her sorry every day for the rest of my life, but it just won't stop her pain." But the two of them never ever did talk, and by the time of 2014, which was when Tommy actually got executed, Joanne had actually come to believe that he wasn't responsible for the murders, so she changed her opinion. So we are now like 3 decades on from when these murders occurred, and the Dardeen family murders are still classed as unsolved, and it looks like it's going to remain that way for quite some time. It's so brutal. Maybe this was someone that they knew and trusted, but did they really know them? It's just a shame that with like all this modern technology that they just can't solve this case. Like, I just feel like, you know, it's so strange how there was someone that wasn't in a rush. Like, did they know that there wasn't a lot of passing traffic where the camp? It's almost as if it was someone who had stalked the family to, even if they didn't know them personally, they definitely stalked the family to be able to like suss up the family's routine and stuff and know that that was a quiet area to target. Just the fact that there was no broken entry, like surely they've got to have known this person. I don't know, I think this is just such a crazy case. I'd love to know your thoughts and feelings on this one down below. I do hope that this gets solved. But anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this True Crime Tuesday, and I shall see you in the next one. Mwah. Thanks so much for watching.